SC majority ruling finds no flaw. In 2016 demonetization process, the sole woman judge on the 5-member bench, Justice B.V. Nagaratna, disagrees with the majority, saying the Union government's notification issued under the Section 26(2) of the Reserve Bank of India Act was unlawful. Krishnadas Rajagopal, New Delhi. A majority of 4 judges on a constitution bench of the Supreme Court on Monday found no flaw in the Union government's process to demonetize 500 rupees and 1000 rupee banknotes through a Gazette notification issued on 8 November 2016. The sole woman judge on the 5-member bench, Justice B.V. Nagaratna, however, disagreed with the majority, saying the government's notification issued under Section 26(2) of the Reserve Bank of India (RBI) Act was unlawful. Justice B.R. Gavai, delivering the judgment for the majority, which included Justices S. Abdul Nazir, A.S. Bopanna, and V. Ramasubramanian, pronounced that the statutory procedure under Section 26(2) was not violated merely because the centre had taken the initiative to advise the Central Board to consider recommending demonetization. Differing, Justice Nagaratna said the centre could have issued a notification under Section 26(2) only if the Central Board of the RBI had initiated the proposal to demonetize a specified series of banknotes by way of a recommendation. Here, in 2016, the government had initiated the demonetization, not the Central Board. In cases in which the government initiates demonetization, Justice Nagaratna said, it should take the opinion of the Central Board. The opinion of the board should be independent and frank. If the board's opinion was in the negative, the centre could still go forward with the demonetization exercise, but only by promulgating an ordinance or by enacting parliamentary legislation. Continued on page 10. RBI had seen note ban as an opportunity. Krishnadas Rajagopal, New Delhi. The majority judgment of the Supreme Court on Monday details extensively the documents placed on record by the government to conclude that the Central Board of the Reserve Bank of India, RBI, was very much in the loop before recommending demonetization. The Central Board had found the proposal as an opportunity to further financial inclusion, the court said. GST buoyancy. December's revenues signal some post-festive fervor in the economy. At almost 1.5 lakh rupees crore, goods and services tax, GST, inflows in December 2020 to signal a recovery of sorts from November, when revenues fell to a 3-month low. November 2022 revenues were 10.9% higher than a year ago, but still marked the slowest growth since June 2021. December's revenues were 2.5% higher than November and reflected a 15.2% year-on-year uptick. While the 1,49,507 crore rupees GST kitty in December is the third highest since the beginning of the indirect tax regime in July 2017, it may be more noteworthy than previous records. First, as these taxes are linked to economic activity undertaken in November, they indicate that factories and service providers were busier than they were in October, impacted little by post-festival consumer fatigue. Second, on the 2 other occasions that GST revenues were higher, 1.67 lakh rupees crore in April 2022 and almost 1 rupee 52 lakh crore in October, the numbers were boosted by taxpayers' financial year-end reconciliations and pre-festive spending or stocking up, respectively. This was not the case in December. Arguments that high inflation bolstered these numbers are only partly tenable. Headline inflation dipped to an 11-month low of 5.9% in November. Services inflation was flat sequentially, and goods inflation was 6.2%, which is high but far lower than previous months. So, if inflation did nudge up revenues, it did not play any more of a role in December than it did in earlier months when price rise was higher. From what is known so far, the 8 core sectors rebounded to grow 5.4% in November from a mere 0.9% in October, when industrial output tanked an alarming 4%. While November's industrial production levels will only be known later this month, the GST revenues indicate that the demand for both goods and services held up. As North Block mandarins enter the last lap of curating the union budget, the latest GST print should provide some hope while working out the fiscal glide path and revenue aspirations for the coming year. Not only have GST collections been over 1.4 lakh rupees crore for 10 straight months, December's healthy inflows lift up the average monthly intake of 2022 to 1923 to 1.49 lakh rupees crore. But there is little room for complacency. Any slackening in economic activity due to global headwinds could drag down revenues too. The GST Council, which met briefly last month after a long break but left critical reforms hanging, must be convened soon after the budget, not just to help sustain revenue inflows, but also to aim to rake in more from a rationalized rate structure which brings all the presently excluded items into the one nation, one tax ambit. PTM/1. Front. Over the borderline. People on either side of a border should not be victims of international conflict. The Government of India is paying special attention to the development of border villages, especially from a security perspective. Union Home Minister Amit Shah said on 29 December that borders could be permanently secured only when border villages are populated by patriotic citizens who are concerned for the country. Mr. Shah asked the Border Security Force, BSF, to effectively use the Vibrant Village Program, VVP, announced by the centre in the 2022 budget, to promote development and communication in border villages. The scheme is for funding development of border villages with sparse population, limited connectivity, and infrastructure that often get left out from the development gains, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had said in her budget speech in 2022. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had said the scheme signified the government's holistic approach to ensure that these villages have all facilities. The Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA, informed Parliament on 29 March 2022 that plans were afoot for the convergence of existing schemes into the new one, and an implementation framework, fund requirements, and other modalities were being finalized. The existing Border Area Development Plan of the MHA covers development of all border regions, and it is unclear how VVP will be different from that. 1 year after it was announced, there is little clarity on the details of VVP, including on the question of whether it will cover all border areas or only the northern border with China as mentioned in the budget. The government has said VVP would cover construction of village infrastructure, housing, tourist centers, road connectivity, provisioning of decentralized renewable energy, direct-to-home access for Doordarshan and educational channels, and support for livelihood generation. There were also plans to open the villages along the China border in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, and the Union Territory of Ladakh for tourists. The MHA recently informed the Parliamentary Standing Committee that the budget provisions for the program have been sent to the Expenditure Finance Committee for its approval. Holding border areas close to the rest of the country is a dynamic challenge and requires a sensitive approach. Borders divide people of shared ethnic and cultural heritage, who are unmoved by rivalries of nations that animate strategists. They should not be challenged to be the vanguards of patriotism. When degrees lose their worth. One of to Krishna Kumar is a former director of NSERT and the editor of the Routledge Handbook of Education in India. Prev. Next. AFP. A student of law who was keen to start practicing in a court decided to do a master's course instead. Her decision was not based on second thoughts about joining the bar. She wants to do that after completing her master's degree. She decided to postpone legal practice as she felt that the LLB degree had not given her a sufficient grip on the basics. This, she hopes, she will gain from the master's course. Another factor guided her decision to pursue a higher degree. If she does not succeed in legal practice, she thought, a higher degree would give her an edge in the competitive exams held for jobs in the field of law. An educational bazaar. Her decision reminds me of the classic book, The Diploma Disease, written by British economist Ronald Doré and first published in 1976. In 2001, a special volume was published to celebrate the continued relevance of Doré's book 25 years later. It is a rare book in that it offers a structural explanation for a widely prevalent phenomenon, namely the urge to gather more and more degrees. Instead of focusing on the behavioral aspect, as most scholars do, Doré links the phenomenon with the devaluation of qualifications. Doré noticed that the desire to accumulate more and more degrees and diplomas was gaining rapid popularity in many countries. He selected 3 of them in order to examine the phenomenon: Sri Lanka, South Korea, and Japan. Although India was not a part of his sample, the insights Doré presented are equally pertinent to India, where their applicability is growing rapidly. Certificates, diplomas, and degrees are in great demand in what is literally an educational bazaar. Dev Lahiri had chosen this title for his book narrating his experience as a renowned teacher and principal, The Great Indian School Bazaar. The title is just as relevant to higher education now, where a vast and varied market of qualifications has grown since the mid-1990s. Its growth feeds on itself, in the sense that the greater the variety of qualifications on offer, the faster grows the demand for them. A young candidate enrolled in one course wants to enroll in other courses. Permission for dual degree admission has further boosted the urge. The driving force of this urge is located both within and outside the system of education. Internally, the system encourages students to gather additional qualifications by defining course content and its aims narrowly. Known as specialization, this phenomenon is a response to the mystification of skills as distinct from knowledge. The phrase job ready captures the attraction of sliver-thin courses that cut the scope of learning so fine that one certificate can only lead the student to search for the next. The greater driving force is externally located, i.e. in the economy. Economic growth has not resulted in expansion of satisfying employment in many countries. In India, the scarcity of worthwhile jobs is quite severe in many regions, even in cities, not to mention villages. The fear of joblessness fuels the urge to gain new eligibilities. Candidates for jobs often select the relevant domain of their multiple certifications in order to represent themselves as being suitable for a job. The volatility of the job market also implies that no job can last for long, hence the anxiety to become eligible for as many types of jobs as possible. Delinking did not happen. In the 1980s, it was believed that delinking degrees from jobs might be a good idea to reduce the pressure on institutions of higher learning. The argument was that if jobs were delinked from formal qualification, it would discourage the young from accumulating certificates and degrees. The idea was reluctantly pursued due to the suspicion that self-educated job seekers might not have reliable qualities. In any case, the pressure to enroll in one course or another remained high. Students knew they could not be choosy, and their parents were also anxious to push their wards to stay enrolled rather than waste their time. Correspondence courses, now called open learning, proliferated. Later, the internet also enabled the self-learning market. It has, to some extent, boosted self-employment, but the lure of formal jobs has not diminished. In fact, it has maintained remarkably high growth in the coaching market. Competitive exams now attract countless youth to indulge in what Craig Jeffrey, on the basis of his studies in India, has aptly described as the politics of waiting. Crisis of standards. Dore's thesis that devaluation of degrees is strongly associated with lowering of standards has proved correct. When a course does not give you what you expected to learn from it, you go for a higher level of the same course. The spiral is extended systemically when institutions face financial starvation, leading to chronic vacancies, dwindled support services, and poor annual intake in libraries. Public institutions of higher education have suffered sustained hollowing out over the past 3 decades. Their inability to maintain standards while being forced to accommodate an increased number of students is reflected in the mass exodus to foreign systems and expensive private institutions. Students from deprived strata can't avail of these options. Just when they had begun to knock at the doors of higher education, its offerings entered into descent mode. There are, of course, many other ways to explain the fall in standards of teaching and also in the expected diligence of students. Digital technology has made its own contribution to the noticeable changes in student behavior. On a weekly consultation broadcast of the highly regarded Indira Gandhi National Open University, I heard the following statement one day: "Please read the program guide carefully. Reading is a good activity for you." That a university has to emphasize the value of reading is a sufficient indicator of the silent crisis that has engulfed the system of education. A plethora of reforms introduced despite the weakening of routines due to the pandemic may not succeed in resolving the basic issues and tendencies that Dore had underlined nearly half a century ago. There is a considerable gap between the discourse of reform and the reality of our higher education system. Unwillingness to acknowledge the persistence of older problems has become a source of further systemic innovation. The nature and choice of reforms can certainly be improved by looking at the residues of past difficulties and at the COVID-19 impact. The driving force of the urge to collect degrees is located both in the education system and in the economy. The case against state control of Hindu temples. Akshay Nagarajan is an advocate at the Supreme Court of India. State management of temples is often justified as a way of ensuring access to temples for worshippers and archakas, priests. Regulating secular activities associated with religious practice can be traced to Article 25, 2a of the Constitution. Temple control legislation is purportedly justified by this article. Temple control and temple entry. However, the framers of the Constitution, being aware of the temple entry movement, advisely provided a separate power under Article 25, 2b, which empowers the state to enact laws providing for social welfare and reform or the throwing open of Hindu religious institutions to all classes and sections of Hindus. Hence, the issue of regulating secular aspects of religious practice is distinct from providing access to worship. This is why there are separate laws for temple control and temple entry. They coexist, one does not depend on the other. Proponents of state management of temples also argue that courts have accorded approval to this practice. Any discussion on this topic will necessarily begin with the Shirur Mutt judgment, 1954, of the Supreme Court. Speaking for a unanimous bench of 7 judges, Justice B.K. Mukherjee substantially obliterated the Madras Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments (HR&CE) Act, 1951, terming the impugned provisions as extremely drastic in character. So violent were the provisions against religious faith that the then Advocate General of Madras stated that he could not support the legality of these provisions. It is left to one's imagination how drastic the provisions of the Act must have been to lead the Advocate General to concede the case before the Supreme Court. The story does not end here. As a result of the judgment in Shirur Mutt, the legislature of the erstwhile Madras state enacted in 1954 an Amendment Act with the purpose of removing the defects pointed out by the Supreme Court. Again, the act was challenged in Sudhindra Tirtha Swamyavi, Commissioner, HRC, 1955, before the Madras High Court. This act too was struck down as it suffered from the same defects as the original enactment. The Orissa Hindu Religious Endowments Act, 1939 also has the distinction of being struck down by the Supreme Court twice, first in Sri Jagannath v. State of Orissa, 1954, and then in Sadasib Prakash Brahmachari v. The State of Orissa, 1956. The effect of temple control legislation. It is now appropriate to deal with the grievance of various sections of Hindu society against such laws. Simply put, in the guise of administering Hindu religious endowments, the state is trenching upon religious affairs. Such a colorable exercise of power is writ large in Tamil Nadu, where temples cannot even conduct pujas as the state has depleted their income. The large-scale loot and plunder of temple resources at the hands of state officials would put to shame the colonial government. Such misappropriation of funds has been unearthed by temple activists and is now a matter of public record. As per the HR&CE policy note of 2012 to 2013, Hindu temples own 478,545 acres of prime agricultural land, 22,599 buildings, and 33,627 sites covering 29 crore sq ft in area, whose estimated value would be almost 10 lakh rupees crore. But the income realized by the Tamil Nadu HR&CE department is a meager 120 crore rupees per year. This is less than the amount collected from temples as administrative fee. In addition, the HR&CE department collects hundreds of crores as common good fund, though the courts have frowned upon such forcible collection. As per the department's own admission, almost 47,000 acres of Hindu temple land have been usurped since 1986 under its watch. In a scathing indictment of the HR&CE department, the Madras High Court in a 2021 judgment gave 75 directions covering heritage conservation, safeguarding and realizing due income from temple properties, audit, safety of vigrahams, appointment of trustees and formation of tribunals for speedy dispute resolution. Not one of them has been complied with. Meanwhile, the state is silencing temple activists by initiating arbitrary criminal action against them. For instance, an FIR was registered on 14 September 2022 against T.R. Ramesh on false and fictitious grounds. It is no coincidence that he has been spearheading the campaign for accountability from the Tamil Nadu HR&CE for decades by unearthing volumes of data. The Tamil Nadu HR&CE department does not even have records of its own executive notifications justifying its management of certain temples. The Madras High Court has lamented on this deplorable state of affairs brought to its notice by temple activists. On 12 May 2022, in a public interest litigation seeking removal of executive officers functioning in 47 temples without any orders of appointment, a division bench ordered production of records. The department has still not produced a single record to the court. Meanwhile, no external audit, as required by law, is being conducted for temples under HR and CE, and there are 1.5 million audit objections pending resolution since 1986. Temple management and secularism. A long line of judicial precedents, post the 42nd Amendment, emphasized that secularism means the state cannot mix with religion. Whatever brand of secularism you subscribe to, nothing justifies a state official dictating to a religious functionary how worship is to be conducted. It is fashionable for supporters of temple control laws to question how temples will be handed to the communities. This begs the question of whether something illegal in its original form can become legal over time. The purpose is to involve the community, which has been excluded by the state. The objective is not to replace one bureaucracy with another. The participation of different stakeholders and the building of consensus among them will determine who will take over temples. However, the evils of the state perpetuated in the name of secular management must be remedied first. Nothing justifies a state official dictating to a religious functionary how worship is to be conducted. Funds in fifth plan for tube railway urged. 50 years ago, 3rd January 1973. Madras, 2nd January, the Tamil Nadu government has urged the centre to take immediate steps for the provision of an underground railway line in Madras connecting Ennore and Thiruvanmiyur, the city's northern and southern suburbs. The cost of the 26 km line is estimated at 180 crore rupees, phased over the next 10 years. It will pass through Manali, Tiruvottur, Royapuram, Georgetown, Central Station area, Triplicane, Mount Road, Mylapore and Adyar. 3 state ministers, Messr K. Ambajgan, Minister in charge of Town Planning, S.J. Sadiq Pasha, Works Minister, and K. Rajaram, Minister for Tourism, met the Railway Minister, Mr. T.A. Pai at Raj Bhavan here today and presented a memorandum pleading for initiating necessary action in the 5th five-year plan to provide this facility to deal with the city's stupendous traffic problem. They impressed upon the Union Minister the need to take up the project, as the population of the city and suburbs was rapidly growing and would reach 42 lakh in 1981 and 53 lakh in 1991, giving rise to numerous transport and traffic problems. The ministers requested the centre to allot 50 crores rupees under the 5th plan for the purpose and see that steps were taken to commence the work without any loss of time. The memorandum said it would not be possible to have a surface railway to serve the main north-south corridor in the city, as the entire area, through which it had to pass, was heavily built up and hence an underground rapid transit system was the only solution. The Metropolitan Transport Team had recommended the provision of an underground mass rapid transit system.